conflicting operations equating to conflict equivalence.
You go through.
You would have like again the oracle or just the concept of something with that would look for concurrency, so they would ask to enter or ask to write to sections that.
Yeah, so you could imagine having like a service that you called out to and literally asked for permission. It might not perform super well, but that is like the spirit of pessimistic CC. How else would you do it? Those of you who have like studied operating systems, how do we do? Seems like a mutual exclusion problem, right? If I have a conflicting operation, I have to mutually exclude it so that only one of the two things happens, right? Or that the second thing waits till the first thing's completely done, right? So how do we do mutual exclusion? Yeah, like locks, right? So typically you would achieve this with locks. And we're going to look at a particular strategy, maybe today, maybe not, called the most common workhorse of concurrency control in databases, called strict two-phase locking. Because you have to be really careful about how you lock when you have multi-key transactions and when you release your locks to make it work. But the intuition, yeah, is that we can prevent conflict from happening at all by getting locks before doing things that could ever conflict, covering our asses, right? Or what else can we do? We could like not get locks and just nod and say we did. You know? Yeah.
Would you just try to roll back operations that don't work out?
We would still need at the very end, like YOLO and validate, right? So you kind of carry out your whole transaction optimistically, speculatively. But then at the end, you need some way to check at the very end whether those operations conflicted in some way. And if they did, you have to pretend like it never happened. You need some way to undo the work. That make sense? So just at a very high level, before we get into the details, which is better? Why?
Depends on how optimistic. Well, depends on your workload, but it seems like optimistic would allow for a higher throughput as long as you don't have a high percentage of conflicting operations.
Okay, sure. Well, so like if there's no conflicts, and this is like the thing we did with chain replication, right? So if there's no conflicts, I think I would tend to agree with you all. Because what's the difference? Well, the difference is if there's no conflicts, both of these work great, except this one has all this overhead associated with lock acquisition that this one doesn't have. So that's a no-brainer. There's like no conflicts, or it's a read-only workload or something like that. Optimistic kicks ass, sure. But in general, the workloads don't look like that. Yeah?
In optimistic, you're assuming that not every chance for a concurrency conflict will actually happen, right?
Right.
In pessimistic, you're assuming that every time it will happen, and in optimistic, you're only paying for the times it does.
That's right. That's right. But you're paying a lot. So let's talk for a moment about what you're paying. Like, what goes wrong when there's a conflict and you're using locks? What? Somebody waits, right? So the cost, you can't see this, right? People over there can't see this. Here, let me write on this side. The cost is that if you do locks, and there's no conflict, you pay a little cost associated with lock acquisition, looking up the lock in the lock table, switching it on, you know? But if there's conflict, you wait. You don't know how long. And waiting sucks, right? Because the more transactions wait, the slower the whole system goes, the less throughput there is in the system, right? What goes wrong, though, in optimistic concurrency control when there are conflicts?
You have to roll back the entire transaction.
Yeah, so you essentially, you throw away work. And this is a theme that's come up a couple times in this class. It's going to come up some more when we study MapReduce and this idea of speculation and the trade-offs of speculation. In general, when you do any kind of speculative work, you're making this gamble, hopefully an intelligent one, that the speculative work will work and you won't have to throw it away. And if it worked, you get lower latency. Because in some sense, you did the work before you knew what you had to do and you just got lucky. You know? I made a sundae, and you wanted a sundae, and it's like, cool, here you go. But I made a sundae and you wanted a hamburger, and it's like, crap, now I have to make a hamburger and throw away a sundae, right?
Just eat both.
So throwing away work can have a much higher cost, also translate into waiting, right? Because if I keep having conflicts and aborting, I might starve. I might never be able to make any progress. Whereas if I did a locking regime, I'm in that queue waiting for that lock. I'm in my place, I'm spot 3, and now I'm spot 2. Eventually I'm going to get my friggin' chance to complete the transaction, right? Well, not always. You all study deadlocks, right?
Yeah.
So as long as we do it
But
smart.
usually, so, sometimes in pessimistic CC, also there's like a footnote. Sometimes you actually have to throw away work in pessimistic CC too, because if you get to a deadline, there has to be a victim. Okay. There was a really famous debate. I should just spend most of the rest of the time talking about this. There's a really famous debate in the database research community in the 80s about which of these was better. And it was really frustrating because this was at a time when people were doing a lot of simulation work in databases, but there wasn't a lot of rigor around how the simulators work. So there was a team at Wisconsin who built a simulator that showed that pessimistic CC was better. And there was another team in UC Berkeley that built a simulator that proved that optimistic was better. So there's something about reality that the simulators weren't adequately capturing, or the simulators were overfit to the workloads that they were trying to validate in the first place. And then this really important piece of work was done by, I can't remember, but I'll post it on Piazza, like 88, where they built a simulator and they got buy-in from everybody, and they evaluated the two things on an even playing field. And the conclusion was essentially this, and this is like a digest of the conclusion, but they were like, for mixed workloads, the types of workloads that we see in OLTP databases and the so-called TPCC benchmarks, the sorts of workloads that we use to measure how good databases are, that sort of everybody agrees this is like a representative workload. Pessimistic CC does better in terms of overall. Have I talked to you about Goodput versus throughput? No. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. We know what throughput is, right? Throughput is like the number of bytes that you can push through the system per unit time, right? It's an aggregate measure of the work that your system is doing. The thing is, though, this might be my throughput of my system as I scale up. I'm adding more concurrency, more concurrent transactions, and this is like my throughput. And it might just keep going up. But here's the thing. How many of those transactions are throwing away their work? How many of those bits that you push through the network are you going to have to just push through the network again? And why are you rewarding yourself for the bits that you push through the network that were useless because they got aborted? So in some sense, exploit's fine. This is like whatever, bytes per sec or whatever. And this is your throughput line. But your Goodput line might look like, in an optimistic concurrency control system. Right? So in databases, we almost always measure throughput and Goodput, right? Because the delta between throughput and Goodput is how bad your system is doing in some sense. Like how many of those bytes were bad bytes. Does that make sense? Anyway, the conclusion of this study was that pessimistic concurrency control wins has better Goodput on those systems that were around in the 80s for those workloads that people thought were represented, except in one case, which is optimistic wins under the assumption of infinite resources. So if we take our model and we take away the constraint that our resources are bounded, our queues are finite, or our CPUs have limits what they can do, then all of a sudden optimistic kicks ass. So that's, on the surface, you're like, okay, well there's no such thing as infinite resources, so that's not interesting. On the other hand, it's all relative, right? So in systems where there is a tremendous abundance of resources, optimistic CC can do pretty good. What's an example of a system in which there's essentially arbitrarily many resources? Yeah, well, the internet, right? The internet, because like all the clients on the internet could be participating in your transactions or something like that. In some sense, like, I'm really mad if I have a bunch of servers in a data center and they're throwing away 20% of their work. I'm pissed off, right? Because I paid all this money and all this electricity for this, and this 20% is just going in the garbage. That's bullshit. But if they're all doing good work, but the poor clients out here, of which there are hundreds of thousands trying to put their spring break photos on Facebook or whatever, and 20% of them, it says, it didn't work, try again. I don't care. Yeah, that's fine. The clients know how to retry. In some sense, there are infinitely many clients. Right? So that's almost always in web apps where the concurrency is being generated by external clients. Optimistic is always optimistic. Yeah.
So question about the input versus throughput. For the pessimistic CC, what exactly, how would that?
Oh, well, so the expectation would be that throughput and Goodput are going to track each other pretty closely. except when deadlocks or client-generated actions cause aborts. So aborts can happen in databases, but they have, like, aborts are the only move you have in optimistic CC if something goes wrong. So aborts happen constantly in optimistic CC, whereas they're a rare event in pessimistic CC.
But they still happen.
But they still happen, because if we use locks, and we lock more than one thing, and we don't carefully control the order in which the locks can be a part, we can get into a deadlock. If we get into a deadlock, somebody's gonna die. You know? It's also the case that the client might be like Control C, and we have to abort. Okay, so should I talk about? I'll just talk briefly.
Is optimistic CC like software transactional memory?
Software transactional memory is optimistic in nature, I think. Like, I don't know of any transactional memory systems that use locks, right? They typically do a validation. So let's talk for a minute about what implementations of these things might actually look like. Strict 2PI, two-phase lock. Not to be confused with two-phase commit, with two-phase protocol. No relation. Computer scientists just aren't very creative when they come up with names. We have two kinds of locks. What do you think they are? Yeah, read locks, write locks. What do you think the relationship between these is?
You can only have one write lock, unless you read locks, there's only one write lock.
Yeah. Read locks don't conflict
Shared lock.
with read locks, right? So exactly as you said, you can have like a whole mess of read locks on an object, but write locks conflict with everything, including read locks. This should come as no surprise to us, right? Because that conflicts, that conflicts, that conflicts. Guess what? We never had that as a conflict, right? So read locks don't conflict with read locks. Is that clear? Okay, that's number one. Number two is before reading, respectively, writing an object, first obtain a read, respectively, write lock. Otherwise, wait. And typically, wait means insert yourself in a queue so that you eventually get your chance to get that lock. Insert yourself in a queue in front of the lock. Right? And there's just one last thing. At commit time, and only at commit time, and this is what gives us the strict part, release all locks. Okay, so the expectation would be, if we imagine sort of a graph where on the x-axis we have the time going to the right, and here we have like the number of locks acquired by a particular transaction, and now we're just plotting on this the lifetime of a particular transaction. Yeah.
Sorry, what's the word before reading parenthesis and then four letters?
Respectively.
Oh, it's RESP. Find out. It means respectively. Yeah. So we're going to plot the lifetime of the transaction on this thing. It would look something like this. As the transaction continues, it gets more and more locks until it commits, and then it drops all its locks. As opposed to, if we didn't have strict 2PL, we had just 2PL, like you see in operating systems, you would have scenarios in which maybe there is a point at which you begin releasing your locks. These are both two-phase in the sense that there's an acquisition phase and there's a release phase. And the release phase can't happen until after the acquisition phase finishes. That's what gives us two-phase locking. And the fact that you release them all at once, it makes it strict. Now, the reason that we do strict rather than not strict is a little bit fuzzy. Should I talk about it? No, I shouldn't talk about it. It has to do with recoverability of schedules. If I do slow release, another transaction could come along. Wait, I think I can explain it. If we do slow release, another transaction could come along and read an object that I had released. And that's okay, because I'm like done with it. And in some sense,